Good morning and welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Hello to those of you who are live, and thank you for tuning in on the replay if you're watching it back. If you are watching it back on the replay, let me know when and where you're watching from, morning, afternoon, and where you're at. Good morning, Tristan. Nice to see you here promptly as soon as we go live. So today I'm talking all about the halo effect, and I'll explain about what that is in a moment. But before I do, I want to ask you some questions. Have you ever seen someone, there's a game I used to play with a friend. We used to sit in a coffee shop and we would point someone out and the other one had to describe something about them, what they did for a living, who they were as a person. Now, of course, we didn't know these people. We were completely making it up. But there were certain things you'd look at someone and you would make assumptions and guesses on who they are and what they do and what their life's like, based on really shallow guesswork from how they look, because you've got nothing else to go on in that moment. And sometimes we would be really crazy and exaggerate it and come up with silly ideas, and sometimes we'd try and take a stab at being more accurate. And we'd never know if we were right or not unless we ended up in a conversation with those people. Good morning, Alison. I'm glad you slept well. See, it's amazing what Relax Club can do, isn't it? So Alison Mead is one of my regular relaxers. She was, in fact, the first person to sign up, I believe, to the Relax Club when it went online, and she was there in the beginning when it was in person. So yeah, shout out to Alison Mead. Yes, so have you ever done that? Let me know in the comments if you've ever looked at someone you know nothing about them other than what they look like, maybe what they're wearing, and made assumptions or guesses on what they might do for a living. That's like a TV series called Watching. They called it People Watching. Now, I love people watching. I don't always, normally when I'm people watching, if I give it that label, I'm not making stuff up or judging. I'm just curious and I enjoy watching how people behave and interact, especially if there's more people interacting with each other. See, we're likely to make some big assumptions that we don't necessarily realize that we're making in that kind of situation. A simple example of this is that a study was done. People were shown different images. Don't know who you are, but it is fun, isn't it? So people were shown different images or images of different people and asked what you think that person does for a living. And they were shown attractive people, classically, traditionally attractive people, and unattractive people, or people who are less conventionally attractive, at least. And they were asked, they were asked what they thought they did for a living, how much they thought they earned. Overwhelmingly, the attractive person, or the more attractive person at least, was estimated and guessed to earn a lot more money and have a more successful job or career. And the less attractive person assumed to earn less and achieve less with their life, or at least in terms of career. So we do this all the time. It's a bias that we have. Had to save for later. Kids will be watching later, rather excited. Cool. I look forward to you tuning in later, Michaela. So when you're watching this back on the replay, hi, thanks for watching back. So it's called the halo effect. And it's not just down to what we guess people might do for a living. It affects way more things than that. So a great classic example of the halo effect coming into play is at secondary school, or specifically, I'm going to refer now to American. I'm going to use American terms because I'm going to be referring to American programs, particularly when we're talking about high school and you've got the jocks and the cheerleaders, and you can all think about a program or film you've watched that has this example of that perfect jock, the football player who's relatively attractive, and he's very capable of sport at playing football. And so he's not necessarily that bright. He's not necessarily a very nice person, and yet he's popular anyway. And because he has those couple of really good traits, one being considered classically handsome and the other being good at football, which is really important in that environment and in that situation, he becomes very popular, and people assume, or presume rather, wrongly, that he's good at other things and that he has other great qualities, because all they're kind of blinded by. And that's why it's called the halo effect, because it's almost as if you're blinded by the light. Now I want to sing The Weekend. Blinded by the light of the positive attributes that you notice and that you're very aware of and that are prominent. And so you assume that there's other good things about that person too. Hey, it's worked all right for me. I'm quite charming, which means I can get away with stuff. And I talk with a lot of confidence. And so therefore people believe me, even if I'm making stuff up. I'm not making this up, by the way, and you should believe it. So yeah. So that's effectively, it really is that simple. But there's a bit more to it as well. You can look into it and you can see more interesting examples of this taking place. So, for example, well, here's a fun experiment that was done at one occasion in a busy, bustling train station. There were two people, two women, one who was considered to be classically attractive and the other who was average, their wording, not mine. And the more classically attractive one was blonde and was wearing a short skirt and had boobs and things like this. And the more average one was wearing a large coat that covered her more. She had long curly hair. I thought she was fairly attractive, but you know, the petite blonde obviously is the more traditionally attractive person in that sense. And they were both struggling to get upstairs with some big suitcases, and they decided to see, they filmed it, so they planned this and they filmed it to see who would be offered help more frequently and sooner, and who would be offered help less frequently and how long it would take. And surprisingly enough, the classically attractive person got help in seconds, and normally by men, and was helped up. The less attractive one was, it took a lot longer for her to get help on the occasions that she did get help. And the first time that happened was actually a couple of ladies to help. Interesting enough, though, it wasn't. So you could easily think that that was a sexual thing, right? You know, men find themselves sexually attracted to this classically attractive person, and so they're more likely to help. And there's an element of that as well, for sure. But women helped her too. Although there's the argument that women are more likely to be intimidated by attractive women, but that's a whole other thing. And in fact, we might cover that in my next video. But yes, with this scenario, the attractive person got helped time and time again, and a lot faster and a lot quicker, and people were willing to go a lot further. But when asked about it, these people would like to believe that they would have helped anyone, and that it's not just because that person was attractive. We fool ourselves a lot into this kind of thing. This is why you look at, so for example, I knew a homeless person called Shane. Really, really lovely guy, such a nice guy. He ended up in that position because he'd been through the system as a child and had been passed around from place to place, and wherever he went, there were other young people, a lot of them young offenders and things like this, and he ended up just not being able to ever settle or feel safe or secure or happy. So he decided he would go it alone, and just stuck with being homeless. And he would have loved to have got a job and done that kind of thing, but initially, but he tried and he had no address, and he tried and he had no bank account, and things were all just, there were constantly barriers in his way. And ultimately, he just kind of got to a point where he didn't think he would any longer be able to function in that traditional established society style, because he just didn't know that life anymore. He was used to being nomadic, sleeping in a tent. He had a few friends with like boats, for example, narrow boats, lived by a canal, and they would let him stay. But you know what? He was a really, really nice guy, and he had a dog, and that dog was his world. He did everything for that dog. And if you stopped and had a conversation with him, I mean, I ended up having him round for dinner on a few occasions, and we became pretty good friends until he moved off down south when the nice weather came and he decided he wanted to go and see the sea. But if you had just seen him and looked at him, he didn't look very well kept. He did the best that he could do with the efforts that he had, but that wasn't important to him. You would assume from the way that he spoke, the way that he looked, that most people would assume that he probably wasn't very intelligent, and that, that there's this perception that, don't give money to the homeless, they're just going to spend it on drugs. And, in some cases that's true. And if you were living that life, there's probably people watching this that would do the same. But despite all of that, he was actually really switched on. He was quite a clever guy. And if you had a conversation with him, he would ask some really interesting questions and had a very unique way of thinking about things, questioning stuff and trying to understand things. He was a really smart guy, not all that knowledgeable in a traditional classical sense, but very intelligent, very capable of using the knowledge that he had. But you wouldn't think that to look at him. People would make judgments and assume otherwise, just purely based on how he looked. Whereas if there was a positive attribute that you got to know about him, you could then overlook the other stuff and start to see more positives beyond that. It makes a difference whether people are tall or not as well. Go back and look at the history of American elections and you'll see the vast, I don't remember the percentage, I'd have to have a look, but a lot of the time it's the taller candidate that wins. That's a really easy way to guess and judge who's going to win an American election. It's not just them. Humans are very shallow generally. But we also like to believe that we're not. And it's not entirely a shallow thing. It's a great point. It's a great point. And yes, attractiveness, physical appearance is hugely important to us. The thing is, I don't think that in itself is necessarily shallow, because I think that's really, that is our first impression of someone. I personally think there's more to first impressions than just the look, but absolutely, if someone looks attractive or unattractive, we're going to make judgments based on that. And that's ingrained and built into us, that because we want to protect ourselves and our tribe, we want to make quick decisions on whether or not we can trust someone, whether or not that person's going to be worth connecting with effectively. No, you'll never win an election, you're far too small. But at least you're attractive, so people will like you anyway. But it's not just attractiveness. So, for example, I don't know, Stephen Hawking, known for being very, very intelligent, not known particularly for being attractive, but if you were asked to guess, I don't know, how good he would be at something that didn't involve his intellect, which is what he's best known for, and obviously didn't involve attractiveness, people would be likely to assume that he's more capable of applying himself in other fields and other situations, because they know that he's very good at one thing. He was maybe an odd example for me to choose. Einstein's a great example. Einstein, lots of people, he's very well revered. He's a very, very intelligent person. He helped us come up with some amazing theories. He was a great thinker of his time. from what I understand, he was also a complete misogynist and just generally a really nasty person to be around, apparently. But people find that sort of thing almost offensive, that you could say that, or shocking, or disappointing. You know, I should have probably thought of some good examples before I decided to jump in and do the live, but I'm sure you can think of other. Well, actually, do you know what? There are some great and really obvious examples of famous people relatively recently, who, you know, they're famous, and so therefore they're seen as being good and positive, and it's not until certain truths come out that you realize that that may not have been the case. But they've got away with stuff for so long, and sometimes that's because people turn a blind eye because they're not necessarily attractive, but because of their fame, or because of their wealth, or because of their influence, or whatever it might be. If someone's good at one thing, and they're known and well known for being good at that one thing, it's not just attractiveness, then we're likely to assume that they're going to be good at other things too. And that is the halo effect. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts. I can imagine that's quite common, actually. Someone who dedicated their entire life to being a genius in whichever area maybe don't have the time or patience for being nice to people. Absolutely. You know, it's fictional, but House is a great example of this. If anyone's watched the TV show House, it's safe to say that House is damn good at what he does, and you can see that lots of people really look up to him and admire him in a way they absolutely wouldn't if he wasn't good at that one thing. People make allowances and exceptions for him, but that's certainly not based on the relationships he forms by being nice to people. So yes, Alison, it absolutely is surprisingly common, or not, or unsurprisingly common, I guess. So yeah, that's the halo effect. It verges on liking loving tendency, which I will cover in another one of my videos as well. So yeah, that's it. Tune in at the same time next week, where we'll be covering another cognitive bias. I might even look at hook effect. Yeah, I will post that up soon, and you can follow me always 9 o'clock on a Thursday live from Facebook, on YouTube, and in my group, Empower Yourself and Others. And if you're watching this from somewhere other than my group, maybe come and check it out. Empower Yourself and Others. It's a positive and supportive place on Facebook where people can actually be themselves and interact with other people. There's hints and tips from me on looking after your mental health and well-being, and at the moment there's lots of fun games and silly things to help distract us from everything that's going on at the minute. So if you're interested, head on over. Just search Facebook for Empower Yourself and Others. I know people who are confident on videos but hate talking to people in person. It can be a bit confusing when you're trying to have a conversation. Marianne, that is a great example, a fantastic example. Because they're confident in one thing, it's presumed that they're confident in all things, until you see them in a separate situation and realize that may not actually be the case. So I'm very confident doing live videos, but I'm also very confident in person. So if you ever want to come up and chat to me, obviously, Marianne, we've chatted before, I'm talking in general terms, you're always welcome to approach me. I do love a good conversation. And yes, I can talk just as much in person as I do waffling on these live videos. So thank you everyone for tuning in and for watching, and I will see you all again, same time, same place, next week. Take care, have a great day.